So listen, it's great to be with everyone. I think everyone's aware of what I said last night, which is I think we had a good session, did a lot of things. I'm particularly proud of First Five on the economic front, UConn Health Center, which I think will create thousands of jobs in the short term and the long term, Bradley Airport, and the reorganization of all of our state-owned airports really to maximize their potential for job creation and commerce in the state. I'm also very proud of the DREAM Act, or our version of the DREAM Act, paid sick days, criminal justice reforms, and transgender rights. Very proud of all of those things, and so much more. We really got a lot done. It was the best session I've ever had, and with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
If jobs are such a big priority, why wait until September to call it back?
We're going to work on that. Catherine Smith and I actually began working on this from the day that she was hired. But she's been charged with restructuring that department. That may require some other things to happen legally. We're also in the process of looking at best practices around the country and trying to understand what we could bring to this state in addition to what we've already done, which I think is a sizable down payment.
I'm sure you're aware of the controversy on the land conveyance.
I've heard something about it.
I know it passed by large majorities in both chambers, but that's because there were 7 or 8 or 9 other pieces attached to it. You're aware of the controversy in Haddam. Why weren't you willing to get involved, and will you sign the bill?
You know, in all probability I will, but I'll take a look at it, and I haven't really had a lot of time to work on that issue. There's a lot of issues in the state of Connecticut that have occupied Nancy's time while she was presiding over the Senate, and my time while I was trying to get some of our agenda done. We'll take a look at it next week, and we'll make a final decision.
There are some job creation, the paid sick leave, the higher taxes will force businesses out of the state. What do you say?
Approximately 76% of Connecticut's population has vacation or sick pay. Remember, if you have vacation, the sick day rules don't apply. We know that overwhelmingly 67% of the Connecticut population supports the concept. We narrowed the scope to service employees. I think this is a substantial step in the right direction, and it's amazing when you actually talk to people how many think it applies to them, but it doesn't, because they give vacation time to their employees or because of other exemptions that apply. I think much has been made about it in opposition to it from organizations like CBIA, who really have look at any glass as half empty.
One of the few things the legislature didn't give you was the expanded rescissionary powers. Do you think they'll regret that down the road if the concession deal doesn't come through? Because otherwise, you probably could have cleaned up that problem without having to bother.
You're right. I think that their approach to additional rescissionary rights was based on their experience with past administrations. I think they were nervous in handing that power over. I think it's a difficult situation. Listen, we get ratification and we're done. We don't get ratification and there are additional steps to take. I also think that they feel that should midterm adjustments be required, that I should go back to them. I'll work with them.
Commissioner Sullivan told me last night that sales and income tax receipts are way up. Is that correct? The national economic news is really not that good. What do you think is going on here?
Sullivan's doing that? He's going around telling you that stuff?
Yes. Well, I mean, he didn't say it was off the record.
No, I think obviously each of the months since I became governor, we've had a better month than we had projected. I think, however, let's be honest, we saw this month's federal labor results. I think the economy has slowed, primarily as a result of extremely high gas prices, which I talked about from the time they started to rise, and from the situation in Japan, which I talked about from the time it took place. So I don't think the last 6 months' performance is necessarily indicative of the next 6 months of performance. I think we have some softness that we're going to have to deal with. I hope that softness is short-term, but I would urge people who have to make decisions in the coming weeks that they keep their eye on the softness.
Governor, perception often becomes reality, and CBIA and Joe Brennan said last night that they were disappointed. How do you change that perception as you move into this new phase of your governorship?
Yeah, you know, again, I think CBIA tends to see any glass as half empty, even when it's mostly filled. I think that they have a business model that requires that they warn people of threats that don't exist, and they're very good at it. It's worked for them for a long time.
Governor, what do you think about this sort of narrative that has emerged that Connecticut is in this kind of leftist orbit and you're piloting a far left spaceship that's out of sync with the country?
It's just not true. I mean, that's how I react to that. First of all, we have our budget done. Subject to ratification, we have our budget done. We can project returning to surpluses in the not distant future. We've made substantial down payments on job creation, specifically Yukon and Bradley and First Five. We've done all of that in a cooperative way. We passed most of the major pieces of legislation on a bipartisan basis. And I think we haven't gone left. Maybe the rest of the world's going right.
The projection of surpluses, though, is based on the fact that you had an enormous hike in taxes that is going into effect the 1st of July. And you know, past governors, when things start rolling in too much, they cut taxes right away. Will you do that, or is it your plan to build up the rainy day fund before you even consider that?
I hope I have that problem. I mean, honestly, I hope I have that problem. I hope that revenues are so robust that we could lower taxes. But having said, and by the way, that's, if you were in my shoes, you'd want to do that. You'd also want to have a state that's properly run, that has some money in its rainy day account, that doesn't go back or doesn't have to go back to the well again. So what we did, Nancy and I and our team, is to put together a set of proposals that should remedy the problem. I mean, after all, I followed a governor who spent $1.5 billion in rainy day funds like that. I followed a governor who took all of the ARA money, I shouldn't say all of it, the vast majority of ARA money, and displaced state expenditures, leaving the problem for us. I followed a governor and in agreement with the legislature that authorized borrowing money for operating expenses. All of those things we don't do in this budget. It's an honest budget. It's a straightforward budget. It's a budget that requires sacrifice. I said last night was not a time to celebrate because it requires a great deal of sacrifice on everyone's part. Having said that, I think it's fairly distributed.
Have you seen the latest video the Republicans have come up with to mock your success?
No, I haven't.
The Republicans have said that you had sort of an undue influence on this session. It was not just about another party, but it's only about this one branch of government, the executive branch. I wonder if you could comment on that. And also, I've heard from some Democrats that felt that they felt about the undue pressure from the administration. That in a Senate caucus once you told people that I remember. I wonder what you meant by that.
Hey, listen, I think everybody knows that I remember everything. I remember conversations you and I had 5 years ago on the back porch of your house. I remember what you were wearing, and I remember where you sat and where I sat in relation to the table that was on the back of your porch. So I remember a lot of things. I was having a conversation with Steve Cassano about some issues in his district, and I remember a prior conversation where he informed me about that.
But did you try to maybe just tell them, you have to vote with me because I'll remember?
No. I was talking to Steve Cassano about an issue that was of importance to his district, which he and I had discussed in the past.
And do you feel that you sort of controlled the session at all, or was it a joint effort with the legislature?
Listen, this is the first time I've been governor. And I never served in the legislature. Now, I was a chief executive, and I ran a city for 14 years. And I think I've taken that model and applied it here. Whether people think that's successful or not successful, I mean, I think that's a judgment they have to make. I think that we had a start. That's all.
Governor, I've heard from several rank and file union people on this big concession deal, who, after your statement earlier this week to us about up to 7,500 layoffs if you don't get the ratification that you're bullying state employees.
I'm not bullying anybody. Talking in real terms and telling the truth is not bullying. There is a certain reality, and that reality is that I think what got out there is 4,700 layoffs, and people started to think that was the cap. They didn't understand that Plan B then had a very long laundry list of programmatic cuts. For instance, I mean, many things. Elimination of, on a wholesale basis of services that would take layoffs well beyond 10 years, in some cases to 20 and 25 years of service. I just want people to understand what the reality is. At 4,700 layoffs, if they had been effectuated on July 1st, and of course they won't be, would have only saved about $440 million. I think people have to focus on what's happening here in Connecticut and elsewhere. So that 4,700 job loss would not balance the budget. We're going to have a balanced budget. I made it very clear from the start.
How much of your time will you spend over the next few weeks, trying to educate the unions or whatever you want to call it?
I think I've done. I mean, I know Nancy's had some conversations with folks, and I've done my part, and I think it's now time for people to make a decision. See, this is what I would urge people consider. We can get through this with no one losing their job, with not contributing to state unemployment. We can do it on a shared sacrifice basis. But people will keep their job, they'll keep their pension, they'll keep their medical benefits, they'll keep all of their other rights and responsibilities, and they'll keep a great job. I mean, that's a pretty good solution to a problem, particularly when you compare it to what's going on in other states. Massive layoffs, and then a restructuring of benefits. I'm just focus for a second down on New York and the plan that the governor's come forward there. Actually, in many ways, emulates what we're trying to do here, but does it after massive layoffs and after a massive transfer of obligations to local communities, neither of which we're attempting to do. What we want in Connecticut is a restructured and sustainable state government that provides services at the lowest cost possible, given the constraints that we operate in. And that's what I'm trying to get to. And listen, I haven't demonized anybody. I understand that these relationships were entered into over a long period of time. Labor's not to blame. Maybe labor and management, in this case state government, made some bad decisions. I'm trying to rectify those. The current package of benefits clearly are not sustainable. But once we ratify this agreement, they will be sustainable. And I think that's good news for everybody.
While you're out of state, Lieutenant Governor be acting governor in the event we have some severe weather again?
Yes. I'm giving her my Malloy Wyman jacket, so she...
DCF, several initiatives that were proposed this legislative session were tabled because they wanted to give the commissioner some flexibility to get the job done. Do you think that was the right approach? And several initiatives that she had been pushing for also, they decided to move forward. How do you think the legislature ranked on DCF initiatives?
I think Commissioner Katz did a great job in advocating for the types of change that will allow her operation and her management to function more in line with our expectations. I couldn't be more pleased with her performance and her reorganizational ability than was obviously demonstrated by the faith that the legislature placed in her yesterday.
Your budget now is $1 million underneath the spending cap. The same bill that increased that spending from $19.8 billion, I believe, to $20.1 billion, also included $330 million to close deficiencies in this year's budget, after a deficiency bill, I believe, had been passed previously. How confident are you that your budget is going to hold, or are you and the Democrats banking on revenues exceeding your projections so that you won't have to worry about whether or not you blow through the cap?
Well, let's set the record straight. It is our desire to live within the cap, which puts us somewhat at odds with prior administrations. That's number one. Number two, we will manage to the best of our ability in this difficult situation. We hope that the decisions that we've made and that the legislature has agreed with were the right ones, and I remain hopeful that we'll be able to live within that cap. If we're not, and I have no expectancy that we will not be able to, we will not be unlike other administrations with respect to the final result, but only with respect to the intentions at the beginning of the budget.
You mentioned final administrations, but as I recall when I was up here, the Democratic-led legislature, including folks that you're working with now, also agreed to exceed the spending cap. In fact, there were deals where it seemed that previous governors would get some spending, some tax cuts, and the Democrats would be allowed to, and the Republicans as well, would be allowed to spend surpluses, and that was sort of how the deal was done.
I think you're right.
What do you think of those Democratic leaders now?
I think mistakes were made in the past, and we're trying to rectify them.
Governor, how concerned are you about these UBS jobs leaving Stanford, and if so, how far are you willing to go to keep them there?
You know, we're concerned about any job loss in any part of our state, and obviously from what's been written and what UBS has said, they're looking at their options. We're also winning some jobs as well at the same time. It was down for the ribbon cutting, I should say the start of construction for Starwood, 840 jobs moving from New York State into Connecticut by the end of the year. So, you know, there's going to give and take. We'll compete. I can't compete with someone's expectations in Europe that they need to be in a certain location, but I'm sure I can beat their price. I'm sure I can beat their lifestyle. I'm sure I can give them a location, their current location, that's great for commutation. But ultimately, we don't get to make the decision about where a corporation houses itself. But to the final point is we'll compete as necessary. I'm sure New York State is trying to lure them. We're not going to leave the field. I can't guarantee you we win. But we're not going to leave the field. Yes?
There's a number of states that are pulling out now with the program that the federal government's just put into effect on illegal immigrants. People who are picked up and arrested, automatically their records are looked at for their immigration status. Because New York and Massachusetts said we're not going to cooperate anymore. Is Connecticut considering anything on that?
Well, let's be specific. It requires that for serious offenses, or arrests in serious offenses, that those records be forwarded. I have no evidence that is or about to be abused in Connecticut. If it was, then we'd have to consider what other states have done. But I have to tell you, I'm pretty confident in our own state police, as well as the vast majority of local operations in the state of Connecticut. They understand what the law's intent is. We'll certainly try to make sure that they understand that as fully as possible. And I'm not going to join one group of states or another group of states until I have evidence that the tenets of the compact are being broken.
What didn't you get? What's your sort of biggest disappointments? I mean, I talked to some people last night. They thought that you have pretty much had a very good first session, got a lot of what you wanted, most of what you wanted, according to some folks. What didn't you get? What's your biggest disappointment?
Well, I think in my speech I said that I think we need to come back and work on jobs. I said that for a reason, because I think when we had to deal with all of these other issues, that we didn't have as much time to devote to jobs, although I will say to you, I think the Bradley Airport or the state airport bill and UConn Medical Center were were substantive starts, as well as the approval of the first 5, but I think jobs and I think education. I've not hidden my desire that the legislature be prepared to devote much of the next session, which is a short session, to the issue of educational reform. As you know, when I gave my address on my swearing in, I spoke about the concept that we need to take a serious look at how we let teachers go in the event of a downturn in the economy or a downturn in the population within a given school system, that there's got to be a better way to do it. I said that then. I still believe it, and I still believe that we can work that out with the appropriate representatives of labor. I got about 2 minutes, and then I got to go.
What was your biggest setback? What was the biggest Malloy setback this session?
It ended. I would have kept going. I would have been happy to. I like to work. I think I've demonstrated that.
One disappointment? One thing you didn't
I think the time that you gave me a hard time, and you were sitting over here, and that was probably the biggest disappointment. We were right there, and you gave me a hard time about something that I didn't even understand. So that was my biggest disappointment. Yes?
One of the things that didn't get a ton of attention in the budget, we've actually got more fuel revenue in the transportation fund we've ever had in state history. You've got the borrowing for operating expenses over with. Do you have a foundation in a couple of years to start attacking the clogged highways? Do you think you can actually put together a program in the second half of the term to do that?
Yes, I do. That's our plan. And then secondly, we're going to be very aggressive in Washington. Everyone's pretending that they're not talking about transportation renewal. They are. There's a chance that at some time in the next 14 months, transportation renewal will be enacted, and we're going to continue to push on that, which would give us additional resources. That's why we go forward with Route 11. That's why I'm pushing DOT to have all of its ducks in a row. I mean, one of the reasons we lost out in some rail money, particularly on the Metro North portion of the line, is we had never done our environmental studies. So we couldn't check the box that said we were prepared to spend money. Now, anybody in the right mind would have known that money has to be spent on the Metro North line. We have bridges that are over 100 years old. We have switching stations that are over 100 years old. And we have rail that needs to be replaced. There was no excuse not to have done that environmental work. But failing to do our homework means that we can't get federal dollars. I'm trying to change that. So yes, I think we're going to have more money. Yes, I think transportation continues to be a big problem. Yes, we're going to be aggressive in going after it.
Please, you got
and then I got to go.
Revenue in the general fund in more than a decade.
Yeah, listen, I think days are going to be brighter. Thank you very much. Great to be with you.